Welcome to Conversations with B'nai B'rith International. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. We appreciate your spending some time with us today. Well, I'm very pleased to be joined today by prize-winning journalist and author Beryl Lieff Benderly, who will help us explore the astonishing story behind the Oyneg Shabes-Ringelblum archive and B'nai B'rith's presence in World War II Poland. This interview coincides with the release of Dr. Benderly's feature article about the archive in the B'nai B'rith magazine Winter 2020 edition. Though she usually writes about science, health, and education for major outlets such as the New York Times and Scientific American, Beryl Benderly was so moved by a trip to Poland that upon learning about the Oyneg Shabes-Ringelblum archive, she knew she had to share this incredible story. The archive is a collection of more than 6,000 documents and artifacts that document Jewish life in Nazi-occupied Poland, specifically the Warsaw Ghetto from 1940 to 1943. It's a testament to the resistance and the heroism of a small group of Polish Jews in the face of unimaginable evil. Beryl, we're pleased to have you with us today.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. I'm delighted to be here. It's a treat to be here because I really want to do everything I can in a way to publicize this story. I was astounded that when I learned about this on a trip to Poland in summer of 2019, that I had never heard of this amazing story. And it seemed to me that as a journalist, I should have known about it because it's really the one of the most remarkable examples I've ever seen of the power, the use of reporting, collecting information, writing it up. They used it to preserve the life of the Jewish people of Poland in that time, and so I think everybody should know about it. And so I just had to. So I'm delighted that B'nai B'rith has published it and is doing this interview to help more people learn about it. Emmanuel Ringelblum and his band of just intrepid, fearless reporters. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for submitting the piece because we're very pleased to have it in the Winter 2020 edition. My first question is simple. You specialize in distilling complex ideas and dense subjects into compelling stories. And last year you visited Poland with YIVO, which is the Jewish Research Institute, which actually was founded in Vilna, and came across the Oyneg Shabes-Ringelblum archive. Now, what specifically about this miraculous piece of history inspired you to write the article? And you've told us how interesting it was to you, that the story needs to be told more. But what was it that you said, I have to do more about this?
Well, the character of Ringelblum, Emmanuel Ringelblum, who was the director, head, founder, whatever you want to call him, of the chief ringleader of the Oyneg Shabes. First, just the way they did it. This was an undercover operation. They called themselves the Oyneg Shabes Group, which is, of course, the Yiddish pronunciation of what we would say in modern Hebrew, Oyneg Shabbat, which, of course, it was very surprising to me that I always associated that expression with, getting together with friends, and eating cake and having some challah and singing songs and schmoozing and like that. And, that's what I think of as now. They got together. The reason they called it the Oyneg Shabes Group was that the ringleaders got together on Saturdays, but they wanted to disguise what they were doing. What they were doing was planning this project of documenting the life of Polish Jewry under the Nazis. which was really not something the Nazis would have been that excited to know, would have wanted them to do as they were doing it. The Germans, of course, had a plan for the Jewish people, which was the annihilation of the Jewish people of Europe, and also of telling their version of the Jewish people's history. And, the 1,000-year Jewish history in Poland, they were going to tell their version of it. And, we know they had plans like the Museum of the Extinct Race and all the lies, their propaganda about the Jewish people. That was supposed to be the account that history would record of the life and death of the Jewish people of Poland. And Ringelblum and his associates decided that that was not going to be the history of Polish Jewry that the world would know if they could help it. And so they really set out to document everything that they could. The fascinating thing also that I learned, this was very effective and it had a longer lasting impact on world culture or history than just the archive itself, the physical archive, which miraculously survived and was 2/3 of it discovered, although third is still not been discovered. But one of the 60 people who participated in the Oyneg Shabes group, and they were writers, journalists, historians, all kinds of intellectuals, artists, literary writers, poets, historians, social scientists, etc. Three people survived of the 60. And one of them is known in English as Rachel Auerbach, Rochel Auerbach. She went to Israel after the war, after helping to discover the whereabouts of the archive. And then she went to Israel, where she worked for decades with Yad Vashem, continuing the documentation of the Jewish experience in Europe, because she was very significant and one of the real leaders of survivor testimonies that were collected by Yad Vashem. And in fact, she helped prepare them for even the Eichmann trial. So the influence of this is really large. But when I heard about it, I was a tourist. I've never been to Eastern Europe. Well, I'd been to Prague, but anyway, we were on a trip in Lithuania and Poland with YIVO, led by our leader was Dr. Sam Kasa, who's the one of the great experts on Polish Jewish life in Poland, and is the author of the definitive book on the Ringelblum archive, which is Who Will Write Our History. There's also a film of the same name, which I would recommend people look for.
Well, yes, we had an opportunity actually to talk to Roberta Grossman recently about Who Will Write Our History.
Yeah, and that's it. So I would recommend either of those to people who want to know more about this. So for me, as a journalist, I've spent my whole career, my whole adult life, looking into stuff that's happening and writing about it and hoping that it has some influence on people. So for this group of people who had the idea that they were going to do something, so much greater with their writings and what they were trying to do, that's what really grabbed me about this, and just the character of Ringelblum. And he was a historian. He was a doctor. He had a PhD in history from University of Warsaw, and he actually wrote one of the very first histories of the Jews of Warsaw as his dissertation.
I wanted to, if we can, let's kind of set the scene here. In 1940,
Yeah,
the Jewish population of Warsaw is about 30% of the entire population.
that's right.
10% of the Polish population was Jewish. 30% in Warsaw, which is just a large number, probably 1 million people, I would guess, more or less. And when the ghetto was established in 1940, in about 2.5% of the area of the city,
Yes.
these Jews were crowded, would be an understatement, crowded into this the ghetto. Now, Ringelblum, from what I gather, really was an impressive fellow.
Yes, he was
A man of parts. He was
very
a
much.
labor Zionist. He was a historian. He worked for the American Joint Distribution Committee, known as the Joint. What was it about his persona
Yeah.
that we're talking about 1 million people. What was it about Ringelblum who was about his persona being able to attract this array of, as you say, writers and poets and historians and journalists and so forth?
Well, he had, I think he had several qualities that he was already an established individual in the intellectual life of the Jewish community of Poland. He had, as I say, he had gotten his PhD in history. Now he was very interesting as a historian because he was one of the young generation of historians who were kind of rethinking history, whereas history previously, Jewish history had been kind of the history of like important rabbis or big shots. His idea was that history should be the story of the people, of told by the people through the eyes of the people, and not just of the important people, what we would call social history today. And Jews at that time had very little or almost no chance of getting a university appointment, but he remained active in intellectual life, writing books, a couple of books and articles in Polish and Yiddish. And then in the 30s, he went to work for the Joint, and he began doing social relief work as an occupation. He never could make his living as a historian. Initially, he made his living as a secondary school teacher, but then he took a position with the Joint, and he ultimately became the director of the Alleenhilfe, which was the self-help. It was called self-help. It was the major social welfare organization in the ghetto. And so this gave him a very central position. And he actually, as part of the Alleenhilfe, he could actually hire people to work in it. And he did hire certain intellectuals who needed work, to like Auerbach worked in that, and a number of others. And that he kind of knew everybody, and he just would approach the writers, the historians, the journalists, the poets, the whoever that he wanted to contribute to his archive. And they set it up. It was really set up like almost the way an intelligence operations works, where you don't know, you only know limited numbers of other people. Everybody knew, except for the central core. Most people knew a couple of other people because they didn't want, obviously, like all these like resistance organizations, you don't want anybody, if they're captured, to be able to give everyone else away.
Right,
So,
or to draw attention to the work that you're doing.
So they would just like do writings. And of course, in those days, reproducing, I mean, our whole idea of how things work is so different, but they would basically have physical pieces of paper. And then at the end, when you think they did sort of the opposite of publish, but it turned out to be publishing in the end, they buried this. They put them in metal boxes and buried these papers under particular buildings. And it's amazing to think that these papers survive. So they buried them in several tranches. The last one was just before the ghetto uprising, at which point the Nazis, of course, demolished the ghetto building by, I mean, just out of revenge. They were really into revenge, and they just demolished the ghetto building by building. So finding the thing was miraculous. I mean,
I want to talk about burying what it is that they wrote, but first to talk about what it is that they did write.
yes,
Now, obviously, assignments were made.
yes.
And what were they writing about? Were they writing about Jewish life in the ghetto? Were they writing about the Jews of Warsaw and Poland? What was it that they wanted to leave behind? What was the story that they wanted to tell?
They wanted to leave behind sort of as comprehensive as possible a picture of the life of the Jews of Poland, just to show it in its whole entire richness and variety. Initially, the initial idea of making the archive was not to document the destruction of Polish Jewry, because at first, of course, they didn't know that that was what was coming. And the Nazis tried to keep that a secret because they didn't want the Jews to rebel and everything. So initially, Ringelblum thought that he was going to document, or they, his co-group, were going to document the life of Jews in Poland to show in post-war Poland. They were thinking about the position of Jews in post-war Poland, and they wanted to show that the Jews were really integral to Poland, that they had a deep history in Poland, that they contributed to many different aspects of Polish society, that they were not this, the Pole parasitic, whatever, that they were involved in many different aspects of society, that they lived in various parts of the country, that they were involved in various, economic endeavors and social and cultural endeavors. And so that was their original plan, was they were going to document social Jewish life to show that it really was important to Poland for after the war. And then they began to realize, because they were also in contact with other communities, and they could see what was happening in through reports that they were getting, it finally dawned on them what the actual plan of the Nazis was. And so that they realized they were not going to be documenting Jewish life for post-war. They were going to be documenting Jewish life, period, as it was. And they also wanted to document the destruction so that the crime could not be denied. And so that also in the hope, at the beginning, they were hoping that they could get word out to other people, to the other forces, to other countries. BBC actually, through information that they were able to transmit to them, actually broadcast about the destruction. And for a little while, they were hopeful that this was going to bring some kind of rescue. But one of the contributors whom I mentioned in the article, she actually made the analogy to the Sherlock Holmes book, The Study in Scarlet, which is the first of the Sherlock Holmes series. Anyway, in this book, in that story, if people remember the Study in Scarlet, the victim writes a message on the wall in blood, writes a word that provides the first clue, as which Holmes eventually solves the murder. And that's what she says they were doing. They were leaving the clue for the people who came after to be able to unwind, solve the crime. Solve in the sense of figure out what happened. So they were concerned that the Nazis, who were telling, of course, systematic lies about Jews and Jewish life, that they say that the saying about, it's the victors who write the history. Well, they want, as the book, which is the title of the book, Who Will Write Our History, is of course a quotation, but the question of, they wanted Jews to write the history of Jewish life in Poland and not the Nazis. And through their amazing determination and courage, and the fact that of the three people who survived, one of them actually knew where the things were buried. One of the tranches was dug up in this, basically archaeological excavation. The second was found by construction workers in 1950. The first tranche was raised in 46, then in 50. The third tranche has not been located, although they believe it is believed that it's under the Chinese embassy in Warsaw, but nobody has been able to actually look to discover that. Anyway.
You say in the article that Ringelblum and his chroniclers created new materials, such as essays and poems and diaries. This wasn't just a matter of collecting things that were there. They were producing new material.
And they were producing literary works, people writing essays, a poetry. They even were doing almost social science or surveys, kind of studies of different aspects of Jewish life. So that they collected. To say collected makes it sound like they were only passive collectors, and they did collect newspapers but there were a lot of things written for this. Ringelblum was writing essays for this up until to his death. He, along with his family, his wife and son, and a group of other Jews who had been hidden by a sympathetic Pole, and they were discovered and all murdered anyway in the spring of 45. But no, there are a lot of very creative literary works and works of history and works of reportage and journalistic writing and all kinds of writing. 35,000 pages is a lot of pages.
And we suspect that when they do find that third tranche, there will be many more. Well, though so many Polish Jews perished, I think out of the 3.3 million, maybe a little over, maybe 300,000 survived. And this is great interest to B'nai B'rith too, because B'nai B'rith during the interwar period established itself, and it became an important organization in Poland, and especially in Warsaw. And a number of key intellectuals and rabbi and others were leaders of our organization at the time. But though so many Jews perished, it's because of the Oyneg Shabes-Ringelblum archive that we know so much about Polish Jewry,
right.
Life in the ghetto, and more generally, a little-known chapter in Jewish history that otherwise would be lost to time. But Ringelblum, according to BBC, performed a great historical mission and alerted the world to their fate. You've talked about that when they reported on it. What did they understand about history, do you think, that they would risk everything for a project that ultimately did cost them their lives. I mean, most of those living in the ghetto, their lives were lost. True, but became a real mission at a certain point.
Right. Well, I think, of course, memory in Jewish culture, memory is a sacred obligation anyway. I think, and of course, Ringelblum was um, a professional, a historian, a professional class historian, and um, they just believed in the power of the written word, in the power of information, which of course, that's what so appealed to me as a journalist, because we believe in the power of information, although these days in the United States, you sometimes have to wonder about the power of truth. But they believed in the power of truth. They believed that this would vindicate, that this would vindicate their lives. And in fact, there's writing by one of the men who actually buried part of the men. He was 19 years old when he died, but he said that now our work is done and we can die in peace, because they viewed this as so important to document, to tell the truth, that the world should know, the truth of Jewish life. And I really think that, I mean, if you look back at Jewish history, at Jewish culture, back to to biblical times, Jews have always documented. We've always documented our lives. We're the people of the book. We believe in the written word, and that's what they believed in, I think. And they used this sort of the modern tools of history and journalism and that, but they just couldn't tolerate that someone would lie about Jewish life, and that's what they risked their lives to do, to preserve, to tell the truth.
Well, it was a tremendous story of it really, when all of this comes together, historians are writing history and poets are writing poetry,
Right.
and theatrical people are doing what they write about, and journalists are doing what they write about. But it is also
Children are writing like diary entries, and little essays about their lives, and
they were racing the clock.
yes,
We read so much about really about the Holocaust, and we can't put ourselves in their shoes, no way. But clearly, once they realized they were on a mission, not as you say and as you write, not just a mission to get ready for the post-war period when they'll have to gather themselves again, but that they were facing the end, and they had to work quickly, and they had to do all of the things that they needed to do and wrap it up before their demise came about. I think it's really it's a story of courage, and Jewish courage.
Absolutely. It's just it's really, and not only courage, it's a story of like daring do, because they were doing all this in secret. You're walking through, I mean, it's unimaginable what it was to live in the ghetto, but obviously you were under surveillance of the Germans all the time. They're keeping eyes on everything that's going on. And you're walking around with documents, you're bringing documents, you're making big collections of documents that have to be hidden and have to be transmitted and have to be, so it's tremendous. It's courage, it's dedication, and it's daring that, and then in the end it was strategic. They had to figure out where to bury it, and then they had to figure out how to find it afterwards, because the And as I say, it's very fortunate that of the three who survived, one of them, this seems to me like a really appropriate story for Hanukkah season, because it just seems to me, I mean, it's not an exact analogy, but the idea of something that lasted way longer than it should have, by kind of logical, objective standards. You wouldn't think that in 1945, when the ghetto is in flames, that 75 years later, people are going to be looking at these actual papers and studying them and learning about them and knowing, to the extent that you can, what happened to these people. So it just seems to me that we could say Nes Gadol Haya Sham also.
You've made a very appropriate analogy to the moment. And Beryl, really, you've
the narrative book.
you've shed an important light on a crucial piece of Jewish history and dignity that emerged from the darkness, and I would add courage. And for that, we are truly grateful. Again, thank you for doing the piece for our magazine. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us today.
Likewise. Thank you so much for inviting me. This has been terrific. Thank you.
Well, tremendous thanks to Beryl Lieff Benderly, whose research and brilliant storytelling are on full display in the B'nai B'rith magazine Winter 2020 edition, available today on our website at b'naibrith.org. And thank you for tuning in to this conversation with B'nai B'rith. If you've enjoyed this discussion, make sure you never miss a program by subscribing to the B'nai B'rith YouTube channel and liking us on Facebook. And be sure to visit our website to learn more about our important work. See you again soon, everyone. Take care.